you like me to just jump in, or David?
I can say a couple things. Just welcome to everyone, and we're glad to have you here today. This is an exciting competition that we started. We launched it 2 years ago, and of course last year it kind of went awry on all of us. But we're happy to have it again this year, and it'll be entirely virtual for now, unless things change drastically in the next month or so. But for those who don't know, this is part of a 5-step competition. And today is really about information sharing to get a better sense of what might qualify as an innovation that would work in this particular competition, how you would prepare your pitch for investors and things like that. Beyond this workshop, then you then have a few weeks to work on your proposal and submit it. Applications get reviewed, and then 6 teams get picked out of all of the applications to move into the mentorship program, working towards the final pitch. Beyond that, BGI is working on an extended mentorship program that would go throughout the year. So there is no loss in participating in this. We hope that everyone finds a win in terms of their learning and their mentorship opportunities to work towards whatever innovation idea at whatever stage of development it is. If this is not the right fit for you, or you're not sure, just don't hesitate to contact us and see how else we can support you in this work. Go ahead, Eric.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, Jen. I'm really pleased to be a part of this program that David and Jen have put together and sponsor. They do all the heavy lifting and put the money up and all that good stuff, and I'm just excited to be a part of it as I can. What we're going to do today is just walk through building a venture, and I'm going to do it from a little bit from a standpoint of what an investor is going to be looking at as they evaluate your venture and your business idea going forward. The key piece of what we hope to be doing with this contest is encouraging people to commercialize their research. And so the winner is really the one that can best demonstrate that this is a commercializable idea and that the money would really help them get down that road. And so what I want to talk about today, really 2 things, and I think we'll take about an hour and a half, and then if there's questions, obviously we'll go. We've got 2 hours, I think, to fill, so we'll take the time we need. The first part, what I'd like to do is go through that kind of building a venture and the assessment piece, and then the last maybe 20 minutes just talking about how maybe best practices on pitching your idea. Because that's something, hopefully, if you continue on in this contest, you'll have the opportunity to do. And so just giving you a sense of where we're going in a way is something that I hope to do today. So with that, I'm just going to jump in here. The very first thing you have to do is define a problem. And I know that's not always the way, a market problem, and that's not always the way, especially on the technology side, that things work. We often have some research that we're working on that we think, oh, this is kind of interesting, let's chase it this way. But we do it out of the interest of science, not necessarily the interest of the market. But when we start to think about commercialization, we know that the chances of success are much, much greater when we actually start with a market problem. So I wanted to go through that at the very beginning, and then we'll kind of jump into some more details on, once you've got the problem, what's next? How do I build out? What are investors looking for? So we'll start with that. I would say it's the very best businesses solve a true problem. So what's a true problem? It's not just a want or a nice to have, but it's something that people really, really need. Okay. It's based on solid observation, strong research. It's not a hunch or a guess. It's not a I think, right? It's getting out into the market and really talking to people that are experiencing this issue and have a problem. It's a little crude, I suppose, but one of the ways that we talk about it when we're meeting with students or entrepreneurs, nascent entrepreneurs that want to get started, is it's almost like a gushing neck wound, right? That person needs a solution and they need it now. And when you find that type of a problem, your chance of success goes up, right? Because you don't have to convince them, you don't have to change their behavior. They need a solution now. Okay, so that's where we're really trying to go when we say need. What's the need that's out there? Okay. So what I would suggest that you do is the very first thing is write a good problem statement. Okay, and it's around this need. You want to make sure it's believable. Okay, now how do we make sure it's believable? Well, it's based on data. We know that X number of people, patients, customers, whatever the case may be, have the following condition. Okay, well, we're not even getting to the solution yet. We just know there are a lot of people that have this problem, and we have data to support it. So that's believable. If we can tell stories about knowing somebody with this problem, we can make it more real, even more believable, but that also starts to lead toward compelling. Because we not only want it to be believable, but we want it to be compelling, meaning that we really have good quantitative information that we can prove the seriousness of the problem, or that we have really good qualitative data that we can tell a really good story and a personal story about this. And that helps to make something compelling, okay? We want to make sure that we get to the point where we really understand the root cause of the problem. Because if we don't understand the root cause, we may be looking for a solution that doesn't really get us where we need to go. So let's find a need. Let's make sure it's believable and compelling, and that we understand the root cause of the problem. And once we have that, we're in a good shape to start thinking about a solution. But really, not until we have those things nailed down should we be going in that direction. Now, the last thing you see there is that the best problem statements are in a good sandbox. And really what that means is no matter how much hard work we do in defining that problem, and maybe we did a fantastic job, frankly, in defining the problem, but over time things change. And so the solution that we come up with right at the beginning, as that need evolves, or maybe our technology or something else evolves, we're able to shift, pivot is the word that we like to say in entrepreneurship, and still be that the problem has a big enough sandbox that we're still there. We still have the opportunity to work this towards commercialization, okay? So if we define and understand the true problem, really that's our critical first step that we want to take. So spend some time there. I think people all entrepreneurs, in fact, tend to race to the solution before they really understand the problem that they're solving for, okay? So make sure we understand the problem. And just a little illustration here, I'm hoping is going to work.
My lord.
Ah, Barbieri. What news? Another invention?
Yes, my lord. The greatest yet.
I suspected as much. Very well, proceed. Ah, you've invented the wooden mouse. What's that need be doing?
Oh, but this is no toy, my lord. Observe its secret.
A ball.
A ball, my lord, which allows the device to track minutely and accurately every movement of one's hand.
Very good.
Yes.
And then?
And then you can click on it.
There you can. And what does that do?
That helps the general effort.
Which is?
I'm not quite certain just yet, but, oh, it's wireless.
It's what?
It doesn't have long, thin strands of metal coming out of it.
Granted, but then you can say that about almost anything.
No, but you see, something tells me that this sort of thing normally would do to help it communicate with the...
Yes?
Ooh, it's on the tip of my mind. Some wondrous thing with which one could do almost anything. Some magical device. I can't quite see it, but I do see very clearly that it would need one of these.
We would need a toy mouse with a ball in it.
Yes, and some antivirus software.
What do almost any of those words mean?
Anti means against.
That was the one I knew. And the rest?
I don't know. It was all so clear this morning when I woke up and scribbled it all down, but now I just think I've gone a bit
Ones and
mad.
zeros.
I see. Thank you, Barbieri. I think this might be another candidate for my special cupboard. Along with the device for wiping clean a screen, which in as yet obscure circumstances would shield one from the wind. The device for extracting food that has somehow become encased in metal. And of course, the Sky Digibox.
All right, so that's just a little fun, but it gets the point, drives the point home, right? If we're not starting with the problem, we may create some really interesting things, but they just don't have any commercial value to us. So we always want to start with the problem and then build in that direction. Okay, so when we start to think about building new ventures, we actually was part of a research project, gosh, 20 years ago at this point, where we went around and we talked to VCs around North America. Now, we talked to private equity, but at the time it was more in the venture capital world. And what we wanted to do was understand what is it that you're looking for in an investment, and how much have you really tracked those attributes that you think you're looking for that lead to success, and see that they actually lead to success. So we had a very large database on this, and basically came back and then went back to the venture capitalists and said, here's what we found across a wide sample. And we had quite a bit of adoption with this. In fact, won a distance consulting an award for kind of this process we put together over time, and it's something that's still being used even in capital budgeting by some large organizations. So this is something that's been tested. It's pretty rigorous. I would say, you still have different VCs that are going to look for different things, but at the end of the day, we can't say if you have all of these attributes, you're going to be successful. What we really can say is that we know the odds of failure go up if you do not have them, right? So it's really about us building these pieces into our business and then understanding that we're increasing our odds of success. So that's really where we are. And what we found was that there's three key questions, 15 variables within those three key questions. First one is there a substantial innovation? And is that innovation valuable to customers? Okay, so it solves a real problem. Secondly, it's not enough just to solve a problem for a customer. You have to be able to create enough value that you make your organization sustainable, or the production of this product service sustainable. And then, are you the one, the last question is really asking the question of, are you the one that's going to create and capture that value, or will you create it only to see somebody else come in and capture it? Okay, so really those companies that went on to do great things were able to answer all three of these questions. They said, yes, we've created something innovative that has value to customers. They're willing to pay for it. We're able to capture enough value from our customers that we actually make money in the business, and therefore it's sustainable. And thirdly, we've been able to put up some sort of defensive moat, if you will, that keeps others from coming in and competing away this value that we've created. And sometimes that's intellectual property protection. Sometimes it's through secret sauce or capabilities that we have or have been able to put together that are unique. So that's kind of where we are. And what I would like to do is kind of walk through those things with you. Okay. And yeah, covered that already. So at the very beginning, we're going to assess the innovation. And there's really three things we're going to talk about here. And that is this a new combination, or is this just another Me Too kind of product? We're going to talk about how well your solution matches that real problem in the marketplace. And then we're going to talk about how big is that benefit that the customer is seeing. Okay, so that's kind of where we're going. And I'm going to keep this at a really high level. Okay, so this is all directional. At some point, if you move forward, obviously, I and the team in entrepreneurship here at Western are more than happy to work with you in more detail. But I think directionally is the right place to be at this early stage that we are. So I don't think anything shocking here. 5 main areas of discovery when we're thinking about new innovation: something that is new to the market, brand new, we've never seen it before, or greatly improved from current products, current things that we see in the marketplace. It could be, in fact, that this isn't a new product, but our way of producing it really leads to substantial benefits to the customer and to the organization. So new methods of production. Perhaps we're opening up new markets. So something that was has been sold in Europe for years is now available in North America. That would be opening up a new market. Perhaps a new source of supply. There is products on the market. They're very expensive. We've found a new supply source that will actually reduce costs substantially, therefore creating great value for the customers, but also great value for us as we go to market. And then lastly, really reorganizing an industry. The great example today is probably Amazon in terms of how they've cut out, so many layers in getting products to people. So reorganizing an industry. All of those are great areas of discovery that can lead to sustainable organizations. Okay, but trying to figure out where is it that we stand in that list. And what we like to say is if you haven't figured this one out, don't go on until you kind of get this nailed, right? So you've got the problem, and this is now about the solution to the problem. And when we look at our solution, how new is this, right? If it's just new for us, but there's lots of stuff out there, we're going to rate that low, and we're going to have to say, this isn't a new combination. We should really think about, is there another way to solve this problem that really would be new, different, and create value for the customers? Okay. However, we could rate it medium if it's a definite improvement over an existing product or service. And then we would rate it high if it's a real breakthrough. Okay. And I actually do have a score sheet that I can pass on to Jan. And if you're interested, maybe she can pass it out with the slides if we're going to go that direction. So don't worry about writing all this down. We'll make sure that you get it. And I should say we're going to, on all 15 variables, what we'd love to do is rate them all high. Okay, if we do, then we're headed towards what we would consider to be a model venture that's worth investing in. Okay, and the reason for that is, and I want you to kind of pay attention to this, if all the variables, if we can get to that high end, what we're really doing is creating room for us to make mistakes, because every new venture makes mistakes. There will be tweaking we're going to want to do to our product, to our solution. There's going to be ways that we decide to go to market or define our customer that are wrong. And so, the best entrepreneurs are the fastest learners, I often say. And so we're going to make mistakes, but it's how quickly we respond to those mistakes, make adjustment, and move forward. And if we're able to rate everything high, it just means that we're creating room to make mistakes, because we know we will, right? And so to be successful in entrepreneurship is, we know we're going to make mistakes, but we're going to correct them quickly and continue to move forward. So this is on new combinations. The next question is there a product market match? And hopefully we've already done this test when we defined our problem. We know that there is a market out there. We've come up with the solution. And now what we're saying is that our solution has, as perfect as possible, overlap with that problem. Okay. Now, how do we prove this? So from again, an investor standpoint, they're looking at this and they're saying, I don't know if there's really a product market match here. Well, the critical test is if you have orders for this, yeah, then you have to say, look, customers are willing to part with their hard-earned money to buy your product or service. And so the best thing we can do is have sales, and even better than that would be, a backlog of sales. But for early stage ventures, that doesn't work, right? We're probably not at a point where customers are willing to give us money for our idea or for an actual product. And so we have to kind of back up from that and say, what's next best? Letters of intent, that's kind of the next thing in that stage is, do you have customers, maybe it's a hospital, that is willing to write you a letter and say, if you can bring this product online at this price, we will buy X number of this product. Okay, well, that's a good indicator to an investor that there's something here that does match really well with that market. And from there, so that's the customers, distributors, purchasing agents, will they buy it in a test market? Will they write letters of intent? If you can't even get to that stage, it's too early, then you have to, maybe talk to some users. And if you had 10 users and they kind of batted the idea around and they all said, this is interesting, we think there's some legs on this. Okay, well, that's again a good indication. It's not as good as the letter of intent, it's not as good as sales, but it's headed in the right direction. And the first thing we should do is kind of shake our heads and said, would I even buy this? And if I was the customer in this situation, and if not, obviously we need to go back to the drawing board and make sure we have an innovation that really does overlap the need, and it is a true need. So how do we evaluate that? It's low on the I think end, and hey, maybe it won't surprise you, but it is always surprising to me to see how many people show up at a venture capital pitch or an investor pitch presentation, and the best they can do is that, well, I'm an expert in this field and I think this is the right thing. That just doesn't do it for most investors. It's kind of like, well, my mom likes it, so you should buy it too. So that's just not enough. We want to see something beyond that. People are really willing to line up and excited to line up to buy this product. And obviously high, if we had sales or large purchase order backlog, we'd be excited about this. And venture capitalists tend to be a little bit further down the road where they are looking for sales. So what we're probably dealing with is angel investors at this really early stage. And they'll be willing to go back into that medium kind of stage to say, okay, well, what are the indications that there is a market for your solution? And how can you, convince me of that, even though we know you won't have sales yet? So net buyer benefit. If the others were simple, maybe this one, just because there's so many colors on the screen, might be more complicated, but it's also really a pretty simple concept here. We have the developer's perspective, that's the entrepreneur, and we have the customer's perspective. So it's going to cost us something to build this, okay? And so we'll call it right here. Now, the customer perceives value of their current system, okay? And there is a perceived cost for them to switch, okay? So even if it's simple to go from A to B, just mentally as people, we have a little bit of a barrier with change. We like momentum. If we're with something, we're just going to keep doing it that way. So if you come up with a new procedure, there's going to be a switching cost that is real for the customer to take on your solution. And so we have to factor that in. But once we've factored in that switching cost, then what we have over here is the net value to the firm, okay? So at this place here, anything that is above here in terms of benefit is great for the customer. So if you're providing value that's all the way up here, then this is the what we call net buyer benefit. So above the cost to them, there's this much benefit that we're providing, okay? Since our cost is down here, this is where they're paying, this is our margin. But over here, you can see that the perceived value of the innovation to the buyer is actually quite large, okay? And what I wanted to point to the board, that's not going to work. So the customer derives this much value, and you derive, as the entrepreneur, this much value. So we're both winning, right? And pricing is just a negotiation over the perceived value of the innovation. Our perceived value and real cost, and the customer's perceived value and real cost. And so pricing is just a negotiation on there. The best companies leave enough on the table for the customer that they're delighted with the solution. And yet the company retains enough of that margin that they're sustainable, they're able to continue to invest in the business and make a fair profit. So that's hopefully clear in going through those simple things. So net buyer benefit, we kind of talked about this. How do we get that? It's not just on the product itself, right? There is a piece of perception here in terms of a customer and how much value they perceive in a product. The best example I can give of that is a Starbucks coffee, right? It costs what, 12 cents to make a cup of coffee, and yet Starbucks can sell that cup of coffee for $1.50 to $2.25, whatever the price is today. And so some of that is, it's just a good coffee, and some of it is the perceived value of drinking a Starbucks coffee. And those aren't necessarily the same thing. So as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, we can affect the value to some extent with our end consumers through price, promotion, marketing, and that type of thing. And that's, I should say, that's why, incumbent firms with large war chests tend to have an advantage because they have more money they can spend on trying to influence consumers around the product. So when we can rate everything high, there's room for us to make mistakes and maybe a bigger window of opportunity for us. So net buyer benefit, what an investor would be looking for is, are there already discount pressure? Is there already discount pressure on your product in the market if you're in the market, or is there price stability, or are there stockouts, reorders? That would be low, medium, high. We have to think of proxies though when we're at a really early stage venture. So what is the expected price we'll be able to go to market at? What are the current competitive products that are out there? Or how is the customer currently solving this problem? And what is the cost to them at that? And then we can start to balance a little bit. Here's where we see tremendous value in our offering compared to what's out there today. And so you just really hit that hard. And if you can show that, that's when we would be able to rate this high again. Okay, so when we go back in earlier stages, it's about convincing us that there is a lot of margin there for us to negotiate over. Okay, so that's kind of it on, are we creating value? And the whole thing is we want to create as much value as we can, because then the customers are going to get some and we're going to be able to get some to build a sustainable organization. So now the next thing is really around how much of that can we capture as a business. Okay, and part of that is getting at our costs to a large extent. So we're going to talk about our margins, which we just covered a little bit. We're going to talk about volumes. We'll talk about repeat purchases, the long-term need hold up, the product to service imitability, and then substitute products. So this is kind of the biggest batch that we'll cover here. Margins we really already covered on the last screen, but it's basically price minus fully absorbed cost. So whatever we can charge in the marketplace, whatever our true costs are to produce this, everything in between is the margin. And the nice thing about this is that we have lots of rules of thumb. This is just a very general rule of thumb, but every industry, you can actually look it up through the business library and find out what average margins are in that industry. And what an investor would be looking at is, are you a standard deviation above the average, a standard deviation below the average? And that's where we're going to be looking at. Again, easier. And this is why venture capital tends to wait until you have product in market, because it's reducing a lot of the risk that you can see here. As we go back, we're in an earlier stage. We're just kind of getting the idea going and moving out. You have to convince me as an investor, an angel investor in this instance, likely, that there will be good margin here. And so how do you do that? We say, well, here's our expectation around price. Here's costs tend to be easier to calculate based on the product that we're making. And we think at a volume, we'll be able to produce our product for something close to this, right? And then I can start to evaluate the size of the margin. Okay. So that's margin. How big is the margin? The bigger the margin, the more room for error we have in making mistakes and everything else as we go to market. Volume is the next thing, and obviously it depends on the size of our margin. We can have a very thin margin if we're going to sell in high volumes. If we're going to sell in really low volumes, then we need a very large margin just to make this interesting for us as we go forward. Okay. So it's basically, what's the size of the margin compared to venture objectives? And then what do we expect to get in terms of volume? Will it be sufficient to reach that objective, right? So paper clips, you got to sell 2 billion of them to really make any money at this, whereas an office tower, 5% on 100 million, you just have to sell one and you're doing all right, okay? So simple test. Like I said, we're going to keep this really high level, but is your volume going to be sufficient, given the margins, to make this a sustainable business for you? Okay. And that's what we just talked about. Keep going. So repetitive purchase is kind of an interesting one. So this is the idea that something that by nature regularly runs out, but is needed on an ongoing basis. So you have to continue to buy this product, okay, from the company. something that has a long life that can be deliberately limited. You know, light bulbs come into that category. LEDs are changing that, but we could have made light bulbs that last forever, and we chose not to because it's really hard to build a business that way. Something that, though limited in its level of repetition, can have its repetitiveness extended through alternative uses. Baking powder, baking soda, sorry, is probably the great example of that. You can use it in cooking. You can use it to eliminate odors in your refrigerator. You know, as long as we can keep thinking of new ways to use baking soda, we can put it in toothpaste. We can, you know, now we're growing and it's a repetitive purchase where before maybe it wasn't. So I often get the question, well, why is being repetitive helpful to a new venture? Like when we did this research, and this came up as one of the 15 variables, people often find it interesting. A big part of it is I don't have to find as many customers, right? To go out and find 100 customers is going to cost me a lot of money, both in time and in money. But to go find 10 customers that will buy my unit, you know, 10 times is a much easier thing from a cost perspective. And as a startup, we tend not to have those big marketing budgets to really go out and hit the ground. We are seeing this starting to change, though. We're starting to see this change a little bit because of social media, because of our ability to really focus in on who our customers are in a fairly cheap way. We're starting to see that part of the economics change a little bit. However, it's much easier when we're selling to the same person time and time again to develop a relationship and create a stickiness to where they're not going to try some other product once they get to know ours. Okay. We also get the chance to innovate around the product and make it better and better and better as people try it and are willing to give us feedback. So having a repetitive product is a good way to go. It's also a good way to go in terms of just regular cash flow for a startup. Once we have those customers and we know that they're going to be buying on a monthly or you know, every other month, once a year, whatever it is, we can start calculating our cash flows a little bit easier. Banks like that, it allows us to get loans. There's just a lot of things in this repetitiveness of purchase that make it nicer for an entrepreneurial company. And just a recurring revenue stream is a big part of that for sure. All right. Yeah, just my silly example here on repetitiveness. For those of you that golf low, you don't purchase golf clubs very often. You have a set, you use them for 5-10 years. If you're like me, you have to buy golf balls fairly regularly. But if you're hitting the ball well off the tee, you're probably replacing your tee every time you hit the ball. So that's kind of repetitiveness, right? So we want it to be high if we can. Long-term need is an interesting one because we can set up really interesting businesses based on fads. I can't see everybody's picture, so I don't know how old everybody is in the audience, but if you're as old as I am, you remember Pet Rocks, right? Pet Rocks was ridiculous. It was a rock that came with a story and it was put into a box and people paid money for that. And it was just a rock. But it was such a fad that they made oodles of money on selling rocks with a little story. But everybody knew that that wasn't going to last very long. And so having a fad is not a bad thing. You just need to set your business up appropriately, right? You're going to push everything out. I'm not going to do marketing. I'm going to contract with somebody to do marketing. I don't want to hire anybody. I'm not doing manufacturing. I'm going to contract my manufacturing. So yes, my margins will be low because I'm contracting everything out in the business. But when the fad ends, I can walk out of my office, lock the door, and I'm done. And I don't have assets that I purchased that are sitting around without a good second use. I had a little bit narrower margin, but I really got as much of that margin without any the downside at the end of it. But most of the time, we're looking for something that has a long-term need. Okay, so factors that affect long-term need: technological, social, political, and economic. And all of those can weigh in. This is what we would call a pest analysis. We would want to take a look at our solution, take a look at the environment that we're selling into, and decide, wow, is technology changing so fast that this product, even though I have good protection around it, let's say a good patent portfolio, I know that at the rate the technology is changing, I really only have a 2-year window, not the full length of my patent life, because something else is going to come along. And when you get professional investors that invest in industries, they understand what that cycle time is, and they'll be, building that into their equation in terms of how much this is worth and how much of an investment they'd be willing to make, or how much of an investment for how much equity they'd be willing to make. So you pay attention to the technology and the environment and how quickly it changes. You pay attention to social trends. Are there trends out there that are meaning more and more people are going to be needing this product? So if you're into something around an aging population, our social trends would support that, that this will be a bigger demand in the future than it is today. Politically, you can go from one party to another. I guess recently, very dramatic in the US, where some things that really had no market now suddenly have a market. And so you watch all these things and you get a sense for which way is the market heading. Is it to my advantage or to my disadvantage? In economics, same way. We are likely in for inflation for the first time in a very, very long time. Now, people have been saying that for a while, so don't quote me on that, but certainly the macroeconomics would support some level of inflation over the coming years. So what does that mean for products and for industry? So we just want to take a look at these things and have a sense for how long do I have to really make it go with this business, with this technology or this product that I'm introducing. So how do I evaluate it? If it's a fad, it's low. Again, not necessarily a bad thing. You just want to set your business up appropriately for that. Medium if the underlying need is short-term, then high if the underlying need is long-term. Okay. Again, long-term, we tend to have more time to make mistakes and recover and keep going. There's also something around defending business value that's important. As you're thinking through your product, again, bringing somebody in that's really helping with the strategy and that end of thing, which is kind of where we are now. We've got a product that solves a problem. We create value. Customers are going to get some value. We're going to get some value if we can set this up right and defend it. And so this is a simple graph I like to use that kind of shows, and that should be complementors, sorry, MENTORS. It shows a little bit about how this is a negotiated thing, right? So we're in the center there, we're the company, and we have customers, and we're going to set a price, and the customers are, going to negotiate that price either directly, or if it's a mass merchandise kind of thing, more in will they buy us or some other solution, but there's a price that's set there. Our suppliers are also setting price on all the products we need to build our product. And what happens very often is those suppliers look up and say, wow, you're making a lot of money. Our prices are going to go up because we want a little bit of that. Okay. And so we want to make sure that we have multiple suppliers so that no one supplier controls that negotiated agreement. And same thing with customers. If we're just selling into one customer, this happens a lot when we sell to the government. If we only have one customer, that customer really controls the value that I'm going to end up being able to get as a company. Another, maybe a better example of that is I have a good friend in the injected molding business. He actually makes that little clip that goes on your seatbelt, little plastic clip for Ford. It's in Ford's best interest to keep him in business, but not much more than that, right? They own all the power in that relationship. And so they don't want him to go out of business because he's a good guy, because, he makes a good product and he's reliable and they don't have to go find somebody else. But frankly, they don't want him to make too much money because they want to have that part in their margin that they can pass on to their customers or that they can keep. So who has the power? This is a small numbers bargaining kind of thing between our suppliers, ourselves, and our customers. Now, when we look at the horizontal competition, we know competitors. They have a product that's similar to ours and they're trying to position it as better for the customer. We understand that type of competition. But we also, and they may drive prices down based on where they're setting their prices or promotion in the marketplace. But the complementer thing often goes missed. And it's important to really understanding the economics of a business to understand complementers. An example I like to use there is if you are in a, let's say a marketing business where you're coming up with, really cool graphics, let's say, for your customers. So you probably need pretty good computing power to do some of the graphic work, and you probably need a pretty good printer to be able to produce it at a quality that your customers will like. Well, where am I going to put that emphasis, right? So if I sell computers, I have to convince that company that what they really ought to spend their money on is the computer, right? But the printers, those guys are going into the customer and saying, wow, what you really ought to spend your money on is the printer. Because if your printer is poor, then it really doesn't matter how much computing power or how many pixels you have in there. It's just not going to look right. And so I'm actually competing with this complementer over what is a set budget with my customer for their production. And so that's where complementers come in. And so we're negotiating price with all of this all the time in the business world. And we want to have a good sense for what that looks like. So what this comes down to, the vertical competition comes down to hold up. And it's just very much that. If there's one customer, one supplier, it's like they're holding a gun to your back saying, give me your money. Okay, because they can control the power in the relationship. So what we want to do is we want to make sure there's multiple customers, multiple suppliers where we can, and make sure so that can't happen. But if we have commodity or non-differentiated products, this starts to be difficult for us. Okay, but where we can, let's get lots of channels and make sure that no one can hold us up. Hold up by competitors. Again, this is looking at market dynamics, and we can get into more detail of it later. But when you go into a new market as a new competitor, a new company, if the market is growing, then your competitors won't feel your entrance very much, and you probably have a nice window of opportunity to establish yourself and make some sales. But if the market's flat or declining and you enter, those competitors are going to feel your presence right away and probably compete very hard with you. Okay, so slow industry growth makes a difference. Products where there's no differentiation, that's why I said make sure it's innovative. Is this really new? When it's really new, you are able to differentiate your product. Okay, when it really matches what the market needs, what the customer wants, you're better able to differentiate your product from everything else that's out there. If a company has really high exit barriers and they've had to really invest in very specialized equipment, and there's no second best use for that equipment, they're going to compete really hard with you when you enter their market because there's nowhere else for them to go, no pivot. So all of these things, you can get a sense for how tough the competition will be, and investors are looking at that. Serious investors are watching. Okay, well, this is a really tough industry. If you enter this market in this way, boy, the competition is going to be fierce. And so they're going to discount the value that they see in your product or service. So those are things that we want to take into consideration. And we've kind of talked through this. So you'd evaluate it low when there's few choices. You'd evaluate it high when suppliers or buyers have little power. In other words, there's lots of them out there. And best, they're all competing for your product. So who harvests the value? Well, it really depends on holdup by customers, suppliers, complementers, and competitors. The distinctive competencies that you own, that helps you, create differentiation. And then how long can you keep that distinctiveness active? And all of those things will help you create more value to your company. So when we start to think about that, one of the things that we'll talk about is the imitability of the product. And this is where your IP strategy comes in. Is your product protectable? And is it a process? Is it a use? What is the protection? How good is that protection? Will lead into this distinctiveness. As long as what you're protecting matches the customer need more than anybody else's. So again, we'd rate this low if it's easily imitated. We'd rate it high if we have really good isolating mechanisms, so that no one else can really copy what we're doing. They can enter the market, but it's going to be at an inferior product from a customer perspective. The next thing we would look at is substitutes. And be careful here. I think too many entrepreneurs come into a pitch and say, there are no competitors for my product. Really?
most investors will just discount that right away and think and say to themselves, this is not a sophisticated entrepreneur. They don't really know what the market dynamics are out there. If you've discovered a really interesting problem that has great need, it's being solved somewhere, somehow. Now, it doesn't mean it's being solved really well. You may have a much better solution, but what I want to know is that you understand who is in this market now serving those customers today. Okay, because like I said, switching, there is a switching cost. So even though you have a better mousetrap, those customers may or may not make the switch to you. And they're going to evaluate you and say, well, they may not be around very long, so I'm just going to stay where I am. Okay. And so there's a lot of things that go into that kind of negotiation. And an investor just wants to know that you've thought it through. You understand that the customers are being serviced in one way or another today. You understand the benefits of your product over that product, or your solution over that solution. And you have a rational understanding of that difference and what it might mean to your business success going forward. Okay. And so again, low if there's substitutes that would directly reduce demand, and high if there's no substitutes out there that directly reduce demand. All right, so we've kind of figured out that, hey, there is an interesting innovation here that creates value, and somebody is going to make money on this. If we're able to rate everything high up to this point, an investor is kind of keen. They're interested. Okay, there's a problem. There's value being created. Now, who's going to be the one to really capture that value? So now it's kind of like they're evaluating the management team. Okay, so we're going to look at what resources you have access to. We're going to look at how are you building things. So no slack, sorry, the double negative. We wanted everything high and it rated a 10 to be a good thing. So double negative there. We're going to look at how well you've thought through uncertainty, ambiguity, and then look at the management expertise. Okay, those are the last 5. So we're getting there. So resources sufficient. Well, you know what? Really, we don't have the resources. We don't have the people. We don't have the money. We don't have the manufacturing capability. And at a really early stage, of course, that's true. And so what you're really presenting is we know where those things are. We know with the right investment, we're able to go out and attract those resources to this business and really make it a good go of it towards commercialization. Okay, so it's really about, have you thought this through, is what an angel investor is looking at an early stage company. I get you don't have the money, that's why you're pitching it to me. Okay, so take that off the table. But have you thought through the other things? Do you know where you're going to manufacture this? Have you talked to the manufacturer? Do you have a good sense of the prices? How about suppliers? Have you talked, do you know who the suppliers are? Customers, all of those things. It's just they're wanting to make sure you've done your homework. The better you're able to, demonstrate you've done your homework, the better rating you're going to get on some of these things for a really early stage venture. Okay. So again, it's just the planning. Planning is so important at this level. And again, it's not because the plan is actually going to work the way you think it is, because that, one of the truisms in entrepreneurship is you have to write a business plan, or at least that's my belief, because makes you go through all of this kind of rational thinking. But at the end of the day, the way it really unfolds will not be the way you wrote the plan. And so we're going to learn, we're going to make mistakes, we're going to learn, and we're going to continue forward. Okay. So is there no slack? This really gets to the idea of where's the money being spent. And for an investor in an early stage venture, if I'm looking at you as an entrepreneur and you're coming to me to pitch for money, what I want to know is that money is going to go into one of two things. That money is going to go into research and development, or it's going to go into sales. Okay, I don't want to know that it's going into general and administrative, a nice office, whatever the case may be, the best phones system in the world. I want to know it's going towards R&D to get that product into market. Okay, or it's going towards your sales function to really drive revenue in this business. That's where I want to know your money is going. Okay, it could be that you need a key, researcher, engineer, whatever the case may be, and that's part of the resources. That's okay. Okay, but it's really, I consider that on that R&D piece of it.
Okay, so they're looking at your location, your accommodation. You're right downtown Toronto. Really, you're paying for that? Why are you paying for that kind of real estate? You should be, you know, in London or Strathroy or somewhere developing this particular business. I want to know that the money's going towards getting the product to market and selling that product in the market. So the other thing that we'd be looking at is, what does your value chain look like? So are you working with good distributors? Are you working with good suppliers? Have you thought through, you know, all the way from, you know, supply all the way to customer, how you're going to deliver the product? And if you put together a supply chain or a value chain that looks quality. The other thing we'd be thinking about is production inefficiencies, so make or buy choices. Early on, we often suggest that you're going to have somebody else do the production for you. Once you prove that you can meet certain volumes where it makes sense to pull the production in-house, then that would be usually what we would look for. But sometimes there is a secret sauce and you need to develop it yourself. And so, you know, there's some give and take on that depending on what it is that you're doing. You know, does our process technology fit with our capacity needs? In other words, are we going to be able to make as much as we want, or did we overspend on our production capability? And gosh, it's going to be 10 years before we ever need, you know, that type of volume. Again, it's just the investor saying, I don't think you're a good steward of the resources that I'm giving you. And that's what they're really looking for. Okay, across all of those things. The next one is we really want to make sure that there's some flexibility, and a lot of what we're talking about here is uncertainty and ambiguity. Uncertainty is something that it's probably going to happen. It's going to happen. We just don't know when. And so what we do is we take out insurance against uncertainty. That insurance can be actually in an insurance contract, or it can be just through our planning and redundancies that we build into the system. So, you know, see way too many really interesting entrepreneurial businesses go out of business because they don't do tax planning. And at the end of the year, they owe more than they have, and the CRA shuts them down. You know, it's just because they didn't plan. Currency exchange is completely dependent on a currency, US dollar, you know, the British pound, whatever it is, and we didn't do any hedging, we didn't do any risk you know, planning against currency. So it's just about planning again. Have we thought through these things? Managerial risk, you're counting on one, you know, star researcher. Well, what happens if they get sick? What happens if they go to a competitor? Have you thought about the contracts and agreements that you have in place? Have you talked about the talent pipeline coming up? You know, those are all things that an investor will be looking at. And obviously early stage, you don't have a lot of that stuff, right? And it's just trying to get a sense of, for what uncertainty there is today, are you doing a good job of planning for it? Okay. And obviously on the technology side, where we would see that is in your intellectual property strategy, what you're doing, what have you done, what are you planning on doing, have you published this already? All of those types of things start coming in when somebody's thinking through that. There's market risk. Again, do you really understand the market you're going into? Have you looked at your suppliers? This is just kind of a, you know, kind of a risk checklist that we're going through here. You've looked at your supplier, you've looked at your operations. Cybersecurity has become a really big one there. Many companies in that kind of small to mid-sized space with high growth profiles are having their data locked up by criminals. And having to pay huge ransoms to get it out. So it's unfortunately really common out there. And just, again, this is just about the planning mentality. Have you thought through these things? Ambiguity of the 15 is the most difficult. And so it kind of became a catch-all to some extent in our study that we did. But when we were talking with the VCs, it became pretty apparent what they were looking for was some wisdom. When we look at the management team and the board of advisors, is there some wisdom on that team? In other words, people that have been there, done that before. From a technology perspective, are your key scientists really, you know, do they really understand this space such that if they have to pivot and move in small directions, they're able to do that? It's thinking about, does somebody really have a marketing mindset that is able to engineer a way for us to get our product to market into the minds of our customers such that they'll make that purchase decision? So it's really about wisdom throughout. Is there somebody on the team that's kind of been there, done that in terms of starting up a business and gone through that process? Is there somebody there that maybe has a legal mind or an accounting mind? And so it's really thinking through, is there wisdom on this team that's going to be able to learn quickly, hopefully avoid some of the pitfalls and move rapidly towards commercialization? So that's what they'll be looking for, is what is your advisory board team? What does the complement look like? Are you doing all those things that you should be doing around risk and everything else? And then lastly, there is the management team. And so we'll look at the management team and have a sense for, is this a team that really can get this product to market? And it's not necessarily, it's okay if there's holes in your team, right? You don't have to come to the pitch and say, no, we're perfect, we've got it all, because it'll be really apparent to an investor pretty quickly whether you do or you do not, right? So you always want to be very upfront, very transparent on this, is that, we've got the science, we've got the R&D side down really well. We think from a strategy perspective, we understand the customer and how to get into market, but we need accounting help, we need marketing help, and so we're hoping that an investor coming can bring with them some of that expertise as they come to the table. And for an early stage investor, they very often want to bring some of that, serve on a board of advisors, have monthly meetings, and be a help in some of those things. So when you take on investors, remember, it's not just their money. What you want is their expertise, their connections to others, and that's an important piece. But be transparent in what your needs are, and as long as you have some solid pieces there, they can fill out the rest of your team for you, or help you fill out the rest of your team. Okay, so that's the management expertise. When you take all 15 of those and you throw them into a bit of an algorithm, this is kind of what comes up. But basically, if you've answered high across the board, you're going to get a model venture. And really, an investor is looking for something in this top corner over here, right? If you understand that there's some troubles here, we have some competencies that we don't quite have worked out, an investor can help you solve some of those problems. A high potential means that looks like we're not quite there yet, but it looks like we're going to be able to do what we need to do to be successful. Anything up there, is investor worthy. I would say even on the tech-based success, sometimes those will attract financing. What we find is most businesses that are pitched for investment actually, are somewhere in here. They're a lifestyle business, which is great. But you're never really going to make enough money to pay back an investor for their money that they've put into the business. So it's one that you're probably going to have to grow slowly out of your own pocket, and it can provide a really good lifestyle for you, but it may never be a really high growth company that employs lots. On this side, this is a can you keep it, and this is it a business? So a fad is a business, but you're not going to keep it very long, right? A hobby, never really a business, but you can have it for your life, right? And a charity, not really a business, but it can stay as long as there's people that really believe in the cause. Okay, so that's kind of how this works. Not a big deal, but the idea is the more that we can rate at the high, the more room for margin for error we have, the more likely it is that we'll figure out a way to succeed if we have the right people behind the business. Okay, why don't I stop there just for questions before we go into kind of the pitch side of the house. How are we doing on time? About right. Any questions from anybody? I can't see if there are any, Jen, if you could help me out with that.
I would encourage everyone to turn their cameras on if you feel comfortable doing that. It makes it easier for us to see. You can certainly raise your hand by using the icons, or use the chat box if you prefer. There was a question earlier on, and I'm sorry, I didn't see it pop up. It had to do with gross margins, and I think, is it maybe Brent Cunningham? Can you maybe tell us more about your question if you're still online?
Then we'll go to David after that.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, sorry, the microphone tends to cut out on this speaker, so I might go quiet. Just let me know if that happens.
Sure.
Yeah, my question was really simple. I was just wondering if the margin, how do you calculate the margin? Is it sales minus the cost of goods sold?
So I missed the very last piece of what you said, but margin is pretty simple. In the simple form, it's just price minus cost, right? And that's so price that I can get in the marketplace, and the total cost for me to get that product to market is basically what it is. Okay, so very often you'll hear a gross margin and a net margin. That's getting into more detail than you really need to at this point, but a gross margin would be product minus cost of goods sold, and then net margin, you also take out all those general and administrative costs to get to the net margin.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, David.
Hi, Eric. Thanks. That was great. As usual, always thought-provoking. I've got a couple of questions. First one is, I was just thinking when you were describing repetitive purchases, and this often comes up in discussions about pitches and products, especially in the medical world, the idea of consumables. Does your idea include a consumable? Because then you've got this market that goes on and on and on. And I was thinking about it recently because it seems like a solid model, but then of course it's open to disruption as well. I see a lot of ads recently for an Epson EcoTank printer because the model for inkjet printers was always you sell them for cost and then you sell $90 cartridges. But of course now Epson has disrupted that by having a printer that comes with tanks that last for 2 years. And
Shaquille O'Neal, right? I mean, that's
exactly.
Yeah, no, you're right, David. It is interesting. It tends to be a cycle on that, is what we find. So, it's the old razor blade, right? Kind of analogy as well. They sell the razors, and the blades will go bad, and so they're disposable. You want to keep buying the blades. What often happens, and you can look at this across a number of different products, is that it's a great model at the beginning, and then people get greedy or they over-engineer that consumable. So razor blades is a great way to think about it. You get pretty simple, razor. All right, well, what if we had 2 blades? What if we had 3 blades? What if we had 4 blades? And now we're going to put a gel in the front and something at the back. And now that consumable is way more expensive than somebody that can come and just sell you a simple, razor blade. And so what we've seen is, as that got more expensive, new companies emerged and said, we have a much cheaper, simpler solution for you. And it, Harry's razor, it's, millions of these different things come in. So very often, and the same I would say has happened in the printer industry, the home printer industry, is that at the beginning, those cartridges were not that expensive, but now, wow, you can buy a printer almost cheaper than you can the suite of ink that you need to go into the printer. So people have said, oh, okay, well, there's got to be a new consumable that we can create because the printers are getting so good, they just don't break down unless they engineer them that way. And there's so many competitors now, they can't really do that. So it just got to a price point where it made sense to go in and disrupt that model. Yes. And we'll see a price reset. And that's often what happens. So you have to be a little careful with that. You don't want to get greedy and create your own problems. And most companies, I shouldn't say they do it because they're greedy. They do it because they're trying to make something better, but they make it so good it's beyond what most people need. And so while, they've done a good job of making it better, most people's needs are down here. And you've created something up here. And so this is all gap for new entrants to enter the marketplace with a cheaper product, because all I really need is here.
Well, that's a good answer. And I imagined that it would involve cycles like that. And I am thinking about it a lot lately because, of course, new things happen like the pandemic. I think we're going to see an emphasis on some products being disposable just because the focus will be on sterilizing and cleaning much more.
Yeah, well, and I have to tell you, the investors do like that reoccurring revenue stream. Even if it's less money, more of it coming in, more often is better, right? Or same amount coming in more often is way better. Just
My
lowers
last-
risk and everything else.
Right. My last question is maybe a little unusual, but it's just something that's been on my mind. I thought of it when you had your slide up about the new venture template, the map of
Yeah.
land. And so this question's maybe not on that map. It's about how you would start a not-for-profit or a nonprofit. I understand you don't go to venture capitalists and say, I've got a nonprofit, but it's not a charity, and it's not a hobby. So the example would be a device that some of our people might be interested in that would be good in low and middle income countries, or global health, designed to solve a problem around the world for the benefit of mankind. But of course, that kind of initiative doesn't really fit as well with, and we're gonna rake in a ton of profits for the shareholders. It probably fits a not-for-profit better. And I realized lately in looking into it, of course, that's not a charity. It's a different initiative. But does it not?
Probably up in here somewhere. I'd call it almost a troubled business, in the sense of you're probably having to derive your revenues from governments or from donors, rather than just from the market itself. Now the government may be purchasing, and so they're not really donors in that sense. They're purchasing your product, but again, it's law of small numbers. If there's only one purchaser of your product, they're going to negotiate hard on that price. And again, they want you to stay in business, but they don't want you to get rich on them, right? That's never good for governance to, at least in democracies, for a company to get rich off of them. So that could be a piece of it.
It may be something to discuss later in more depth, but I think it's held up some of our global health potential and initiatives, because of course price is paramount, and it has to be very low if you're looking at low resource settings, and profit is unseemly, I guess, in that setting.
Yeah, David, I think what we're seeing, and I do think this is a trend that is really growing, is call them B Corp, call them purpose-driven organizations, whatever the case may be, but a certain percent of profits are going back into a cause, right? And I think as a society, we're starting to look for companies more that do good as well as make money. And so I would say less of them are being set up as not-for-profits today as are being set up as dual-purpose corporations. So we have to make enough money to be sustainable, but really what we want to do is solve this problem. And our product or service is a means to help us solve that problem. And we're certainly seeing more and more of that. So for every pair of shoes you buy, we're going to donate, 5 to this community type of thing.
I don't want to drag that out, but if I understand it then, so if I had a company that had a sufficiently lucrative product to bring in a significant profit margin, that profit could be used to support a health product.
Yeah, and more companies are stating right up front, look, 10% or 20% or whatever the number is of the price you're paying is going to go towards this cause. Now there's greenwashing, and there's a lot of things out there, but I think companies are really I shouldn't say it that way. I should say it the other way. Consumers are holding companies up to the light much more than they have in the past. And when you say something, you better be delivering on it, or you're really getting, crucified in social media and customer revolts. And we're seeing more and more of that nowadays. So I think companies are having to be very careful. If they're making a promise, they're having to deliver on it. But I do see more and more companies going down that road. And there's actually a certification for some of that and whatnot.
Great.
Jacob.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Every time I see this, I'm at a different stage, so there's always something fresh that helps. I think my question is primarily around quantifying value for the purpose of a pitch in healthcare. In particular, how do we quantify perceived value from a customer where the main benefit of a product is health related and health improvement and avoidance of healthcare costs down the line? Because I think that can be very challenging to put to a number financially that makes sense in a pitch.
Yeah. Yeah, it is hard, and particularly when you have a one-payer system, to kind of quantify how much value you're creating becomes even more difficult, I think. So no good answer for you, Jacob, other than I think you do want to do the best you can to quantify that. So here's the quality of life difference. If we can do that, that's worth something to us. And as voters, if we really believe it and are willing to vote that way, we can make that value come true. But the other thing that I think where you have maybe even a stronger argument is when you can say, this procedure costs X dollars, but over the course of 5 years, 10 years, it saves, X plus dollars, or X times, plus dollars. And being able to really quantify that with data, I think is something that will make a difference in that calculation that the single payer, the customer is making. But it is hard, especially when budgets are being scrutinized and reduced, to go down some of that road. And it's partially why we don't see as much innovation as we'd like to see in some of our systems.
So when we're at this stage, then I guess as a follow-up, and pitching in competitions like this, would you expect those numbers that we throw out to be somewhat speculative in terms of we believe we can prevent this many cases of this happening, which would have a benefit of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely, you have to, right? And I'll say that a little bit. I have a couple slides on, how to pitch, and basically, one of the slides says, look, you're selling air here, right? You're really early stage. So an investor is looking at an early stage venture like that and kind of probably going into it not believing you. And so your job is to provide enough data and enough persuasion to bring them along to say, okay, I see it, right? But at the very beginning, you're just selling air, right? It's an idea, and you have to make it as real as possible. So prototypes help for sure, data, customer testimonials, purchaser, if it's a hospital or a government, testimonials. And then if I step back from that, Jacob, the other thing that I would say is you should be selling it where you have the best opportunity to create a sustainable venture and provide value. And that's a short way of saying, look, if it won't sell in our system, but you're convinced it'll create a lot of value, find a system where it will sell. And that should be your primary market, right? I think too many of us make the mistake, and I don't know that this is what you're doing, Jacob. I'm just going to make a general point here. Too many of us make the mistake that my market is my local community or my national community. Your market is where your customers are, where they see the value and are willing to share that value with you, right? And so where's the best market? That's where we need to go.
Awesome. Thank you.
You bet. Anything else? I don't see them on my list. So I just have a very quick pitch presentation I wanted to go through with you, and hopefully this is something. I think, Jen, we did make this change in my edit I sent back to you, so I'm hoping we're on the same page. This will be the pitch format that you'll be using if you make it into and through the competition. And so I just wanted to go through quickly to explain it a little bit and maybe some tips along the way. And the first thing is, before you even start, what's your core message? Is it around saving lives? Is it, saving money? Providing shorter recovery time? What's your core message? What is it you're trying to do? And remember that part of that, if you're pitching to investors, is part of the core message is, I need X dollars and it's going to go towards the following, right? What you'll want to think through is how your presentation or your core message benefits your audience. And so if your audience is investors, part of it has to be, there's going to be a return at the end of the day on your investment. Okay, if they're investors, they're not there for goodwill. Then it's a charity. It's not an investor, and so they're looking for a return. But they may be looking for other things. And this is why it's important for you to get to know, when you can, who's in the room and what's important to them. because they may have a portfolio of companies that is missing you. Okay, you fill out their portfolio, right? It's something they don't have. It's a technology that completes some other things that they're working with. And so you may have an advantage that you don't even know about. And so understanding that will help you play to that a little bit more effectively and make sure that you're the one that gets that slot rather than some other company somewhere else. Okay, so make sure you understand who they are. And then understand the barriers there are to investors accepting your message. And a lot of that is believable, right? Do I believe this person? Do I trust this person? You know, entrepreneurs get a lot of static, and a lot of it's, you know, deserved in terms of doing crooked things, you know, cheating customers. But frankly, those aren't really the entrepreneurs that are around for very long. They're certainly not serial entrepreneurs, because really as an entrepreneur, all you have is, you know, your reputation. And so be guarded with your reputation, be careful with your reputation. If you're making promises, be sure it's something you can deliver. Because if you go into these and you've been through it once or twice and people know you as a straight shooter and somebody that's going to just work their bum off to make this work, you're much more likely to get the investment and the benefit of the doubt than somebody they don't know, or somebody that, you know, gives up as soon as things get hard, or someone that overpromised and then underdelivered. So you want to be the other way, right? Underpromise, overdeliver. And that's a hard line, because when you're in these investment pitches, you have to make it sound as good as you can, but you don't want to stretch it so far that you lose reputation. If you have common ground that you share with the investors, obviously, you know, you want to hook into that, right? That could be alma mater, that could be hobbies, whatever it might be, but that's a way for us to connect on a personal level. And frankly, I'm more likely to invest if I have that connection. Okay. And then at the end, you make sure that you ask for whatever it is you're looking for. Too many times presentations end and everybody kind of looks around and goes, well, what do you want? What are you looking for? So you really need to make sure you make that ask at the end of your presentation. For maybe it's not for money, maybe it's for expertise, support, consulting, whatever it is, but you need to ask for what you want. 10 slides is really what we're looking at. It can be a couple more. This is from Guy Kawasaki, this first part, and then I'm going to switch to Sequoia. But basically, the way Guy thinks about it is that your pitch is really meant to generate interest for somebody to call you back and really get into detail with you, right? Most of these pitches that you're giving, when you're invited in, you've only got a half an hour. What you're trying to do is get that second appointment where you're really going to get into more due diligence and detail about your product or solution to a particular problem. So don't go into these, you know, expecting you're going to cover every single aspect of your startup. You have to figure out, okay, what is it the investor wants to hear, and really focus on those points. And so these 10 slides that I'm going to walk through in a minute will help you do that. Okay. Recommended number of slides is 10. It's an impossibly low number. It really is. You could probably spend 10 slides just on your technology. You could probably spend 20 slides on your technology. The problem is you'll have lost most of your audience, okay? Except the other researchers in the room, and they're probably not the ones that are there to invest in your business anyways. So you really want to nail it down to the really critical pieces of information, right? And limiting yourself to 10 slides makes you do that. You can add a few more, of course, right? It doesn't have to be just 10, but really, you know, in a very short presentation, you don't want it to be too many more. You know, 15, okay. But what I find is that the more slides you use, the less compelling your argument becomes, because you've had to slice it and dice it way too much. If it's really compelling, boy, you know, one slide might be enough. Okay, so try and limit that. Don't bludgeon people to death with information. So Sequoia Capital has a bit of a format that we're moving to across the university for competitions, for demo days and things like that coming up. So I should say, hopefully, to this group, if you have an idea that is, you know, pretty well baked at this point, you have a sense for how to get to market, We are having what we call Amplify Day, and you should be seeing, I hope, social media and announcements about that coming up mid-April. I think it's April 12th. And that's for anyone associated with the university that there's some prize money. But the big thing is the top 5 teams that go through that will go into our demo day. We had one in December, our first real one. We had over 200 angel investors show up to that meeting, 12 institutional investors. And of the 5, from the 5 teams, they secured over $3 million in investment. So that'll be coming up on the demo day piece will be on April 30th. The top 5 teams coming through Amplify will get a chance to go to demo day. And there's some prizes just within Amplify as well that are not in, not equity investments, just prize money. So if you have something that's at that level, I'd encourage you to look for that. If you don't see it, send me an email. So here's the 10 slides. First one, probably a title slide. I won't even count that in your 10, but make sure it has your contact information on it. Okay, there's nothing worse than a slide deck that doesn't tell me how to get in touch with the team. Okay, so make sure contact information, name of your company, all of that is on the title slide. And maybe if you have a quick tagline or purpose or something, you can throw that on, but make it a very simple slide. It's got your contact information. All right, after that, then we go into company purpose. Start here. A single sentence, if you can, define your company. Harder than it looks, easy to get caught up into listing features instead of communicating your mission, but what is it that you are going to do? What's your company purpose? Second slide, problem. Describe the pain of your customer. How is this to address today? And what are the shortcomings to the current solutions? Okay, remember, that's just a problem statement. You're not telling about your solution. You're talking about the problem and why the current solutions are inadequate. Now, the third slide, you get to explain, aha, here is the solution. Here's the value proposition. Here's why it's unique. Here's why it's compelling. Here's why it's believable. Here's why your solution will endure and where you're going to go from here. Okay, so if you're not quite done, what are the next steps? Sequoia likes, and this is an interesting one, why now? Okay. And I like this because your solution may not have worked before. If you think about my little short slide, windshield wiper didn't work before there were windshields, right? But now the time is right for that. And so why now? The idea nature hates a vacuum. So why hasn't your solution been built before now? Okay. Why wasn't this important a year ago, 5 years ago? Why is it today that you think this is going to take off, right? Because an investor will be looking at it saying, okay, it's interesting. Yeah, I see the problem. That problem's been around for 5-10 years. How come a solution hasn't been put forward before now? Okay, and they're going to want to know an answer to that. Okay, because if there's not a solution, it may mean there's just not a market. Okay, so that why now is important for that reason. And then market potential, identify your customer and the size of your market. So here's who my customer looks like. A bottom-up approach, and this is really, I think, a good way to go. So if I know, Jan has a particular prescription in her glasses or whatever, and I say, well, this is the person that is my customer. And I'm going to describe Jan, and then I'm going to say, and there are X number of Jans in this market and in this market and this market. So you're kind of building from the individual out, but really letting the investor know how many people, that you know who the people are and how many of them are there with this real need that you identified in the problem. Okay. Number 6, competition alternatives. This is where you do not go in and say, I have no competitors. This is where you go in and say, this is how the problem is being solved today. Here are the players in that. Okay, and here's how I'm going to win. Here's why I'm better than they are. And so this is where you really get to differentiate yourself from those other people that are in the marketplace. Okay, business model is that there's a lot in this. So this is where you might want to spend more than one slide. So, but this is basically how are you going to make your product? How are you going to get your product to market? And how do you make money on this? Okay, so it's all of that kind of getting product to market and showing that you're going to make money on it. Here's my revenue sources. Here's my major costs. Here's how I deliver value to the customers. Okay, so all of that comes in the business model. It might take more than one slide to do that. The team, who's on your team? You know, who are the founders? Who are the key team members? If you have a sense for what you're missing, I think I personally think it's good to just put that out there. Okay, here's who the next person we hire, bring on as an equity partner. We're looking for somebody with the following profile. Okay, as an investor, even as an interested observer, I might be able to connect you with somebody and help you with down that journey. Okay. Financials, if you have any, please include them. This is, I think, Jacob made mention of this. You probably don't have any. And so a lot of this is speculative. So all you're really trying to do is give the investor a sense of a couple things. One, size of the market, how big you think your margins are, and about how long it'll take you to become profitable. Okay, so if you can do that in your financials, that's probably enough. A bunch, a spreadsheet with a ton of numbers on it, you don't need that because I'm not going to believe them anyways, right? But if you can give me a good story about here's how much money I need, here's my price, here's my margin, here's how many units I need to sell. I think I can sell that many units within 3 years, at which point I should be able to turn profitable. In 3 more years, I'll be able to pay off my investors. So, a story that looks something like that is probably all that you need. You can do it on a spreadsheet if you want, but don't show me a 1,000 numbers on a spreadsheet and expect that I'm going to do anything except shake my head. Okay. The vision then, I think, is the other important piece. So if all goes out well, what will you have built in 5 years? And here's where you get to kind of summarize all the cool stuff you've already told me, as well as, with your investment of, $250,000, 5 years from now, I will be, running a profitable business, and we'll be well on our road for, return on your investment. Whatever it is, but this is your chance to kind of summarize, say how cool this is, put your ask out there and say why you think, you're a good bet for that investor. So those are the 10 slides. And what I want to say is what I said already, so I won't spend much time here, but you are selling air, right? I mean, you don't have anything yet, probably. And so how do you make it real? If you have prototypes, I think that's great. If you have a working prototype, that's fabulous. But if you don't, it's even better to create something out of cardboard than to just try and describe it. If there's something that I can see, if I can hold, I can shape, it just makes it more real to me instead of just an idea that's out there. And the earlier stage you are, the more important this is, right? Because if you're just sounding like it's a research project and I don't know if anything's ever going to come out of this, you're already done. Okay, I'm not considering you. But if it's a research project, but here's what it's going to look like. Here's the first generation, second generation, you've made it real. And now I can see the path and, oh, okay, so this is just time. Like this is going to happen. It's just time to get through those. So a prototype or a simulation makes a huge, huge difference in an investor taking you seriously. Okay. Otherwise, it's just a research project, and come back in a couple of years when you have something. Simulations, if your business is more attuned in that sense, a simulation works. I would say to the extent you can tell stories where you can, bring a customer's perspective into it, then you can really appeal to me emotionally and rationally, and that's a good way to go for sure. Testimonials from people that have the issue and what your potential solution would mean to them. So when you're not in market, these are the kind of things you have to do to make it real. Common pitfalls, you never want to go in. All I need is 1% of the Chinese market or 1% of this really huge market. That's not what people want to see. What they want to hear is that you know who your customer is, Jan, with the glasses we determined earlier, and I know how many Jans there are, and here's my plan to get to them. That's what I want to hear. Not all I need is 1%. What you're telling me is you have no plan. You're going to throw some darts and hope they hit something, right? So don't go into a pitch that way, and it's a pretty common thing. This one's harder, the hockey stick financial projections, because as an investor, I want to see the hockey stick financial projections. That is, you're going along for a while and then suddenly your profits, your revenue are going to take off. The problem is I don't believe your hockey stick financial projections, right? So what I'd rather have you come in and say is, here's how many years I think to break even. I really believe that we can get this many customers in, within 5 years. And it's going to look like a hockey stick, but you're not leading with the hockey stick. You're leading with the rationale around sales and numbers. Okay. So that's why I say this is a finesse one, right? Because as an investor, I do want to see that sales at some point are going to take off and create a return for my investment. But, unless there's the rationale behind it, I'm not going to believe it. This one always kills me. Great idea. The team just doesn't care. Find a professional pitch person, that can go in and sell the sham wow, because that guy believes in the sham wow, right? I mean, if you've seen that infomercial, you know what I'm talking about. And it's not to be cheesy, but you need to go in and believe what you're saying and be excited about it. Because if you're not excited about it, trust me, no one else is going to be, right? You're selling air. It's early stage research. If you're not excited about the potential commercial opportunity with this product and the lives that it's going to make better, no one else is going to be excited about it. So get excited. This is cool stuff. When I go into labs and see what people are doing and they describe it to me in monotone, I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, show some emotion and get excited about it. And the other part of the reason for that is if this is hard, you're going to hit a lot of setbacks. It's not going to work the way you think it's going to work. And so if you don't show some real excitement and passion for this, I just don't believe you're going to make the path, the journey, right? You're going to go on to whatever the next project is. So I want to see that real commitment, real passion and excitement about the idea. The other thing is take me through a story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Don't bounce around. And at the end of the day, I'm not really sure if I know what product you're selling or where you're selling it. It's got to be a nice logical progression. You're connecting all the dots. This one's pretty common. You get a lot of people. I think try and take that out of the vocabulary. It should really be around the data shows. Data shows, people I've talked to. My focus group, my survey, my sample, whatever it is, try and say data instead of I think, quote data instead of I think, and then make sure you're presenting a deal at the end, okay? And if you don't, no action can take place. I'm not a huge believer in getting up there and saying, I'm looking for 250,000 in exchange for 10% or 100% equity in my company. I'd rather take that offline and have a negotiation with somebody once I know who they are. Right? Because frankly, I've got, I'll pick on Jacob and David now. I've picked on Jan enough. I may be willing to give David a different deal than I give Jacob, depending on what he's bringing to the table besides the investment. And so I hate to go out there and say 250,000 for 30% equity, because frankly, I might give David 40, 50%, 60% equity if he's bringing other things to the table. And Jacob, and no offense, Jacob, love you. I might say, gosh, if it's just money and one or two connections, maybe it's more 15, 20%, right? And so I hate to give that deal out there. I prefer to say, here's what I need to get to these goals. And I'd love to have a conversation with anybody that has an interest in that. And then try and take it off and do that negotiation later. Okay? You can't always do that, but that's certainly my preference. All right. So with that, happy to go to other questions. And David, I'm not giving you 60%. I'm just telling you now.
No, I would say Jacob's probably a better investment. So just a heads up, especially because I'm talking about not-for-profits.
Yeah, yeah, that's what scared me. All good.
I can start off by comment on your last slide. You were making me nervous with those pitfalls because I think I've fallen into most of them. The one about the 1% of the market. I think we're drawn to that in biomedical projects because the markets tend to be so huge. You know, if you name a medical problem, boy, I can put a lot of zeros behind the cost.
Yeah.
So I think that was very thought provoking. Yeah, just because a lot of money is spent on hip implants,
Yeah.
doesn't mean that we're going to capture it.
No. And that's exactly the problem with it, David, is that it sounds like there's no plan if you just go out and say, this is a huge market and I'm sure we'll get some of it. Yeah, no, there's competitors out there. So tell me who your customer is, why your solution is better for that customer, and then tell me how many of those types of customers there are and how you're going to get to them. You know, and that's really the story that we want to hear there.
My last point is more of a comment than a question, I guess, but I really wanted to reinforce this, especially for trainees and researchers that are on the call. I'm on a federal grant funding panel now for several years at CIHR, and just strangely during this conversation with you, it's really crystallized with me. We sit around the table like venture capitalists,
Yeah,
with a big fund. Only the fund is the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. They're the one with $580 million.
right.
And in my panel last year, we got 60 proposals, 60 pitches, and only 8 were funded.
Yep.
And if I had to put down 10 slides for grant writers to get theirs into the top 13%, they would have been almost exactly the same as your 10 slides.
Fantastic.
So people out there who are doing on this call and they're thinking, oh, should I waste my time on entrepreneurship with Eric and Jan, or should I think about my future with federal funding for research initiatives? Well, they're just like two sides of the same coin.
They are. And you know, David, it's funny you say that, because it did kind of spark something with me as well. What we're all talking about is creating value, right? So why is this research project interesting? Because it has a chance to save lives, to, you know, create better care, whatever that is. And that's really what everybody's looking for. There's a monetization piece to it that an investor is looking at, but it all comes from creating great value in the market out there for our customers, patients, whoever it is. And so that's what we're all looking for. So it, you know, the fact that it's very similar to what you're looking at grant writing makes perfect sense to me.
Well, the core similarity is when you mentioned the novelty. I think it was like, why now? Why you? Why now?
Yeah.
You know, that's the very common core similarity, because in medical research, the problem's usually not new. It's just, you know, why do you have a new solution now?
Right. Yeah. Right. Any other questions from anybody?
Hey, Eric. Thanks for the talk. It was very insightful and clear. I just have a question about the award itself. So my understanding is that it's essentially seed money and not an equity investment. But is there any IP transfer with that, or no IP involvement at all?
Nope. We're just want you to succeed, Alexander.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
Seems suspicious, doesn't it?
He does. No, this is really just about wanting you guys to, you know, see good ideas get pushed further towards commercialization. And it's David and Jan. It's not me. It's MSK.
Hi, everybody. Can I ask one too?
Yep. Hi, Crow.
Good to see everybody.
Yes.
Mike.
It's
okay,
Mike. Yeah.
Yeah. All the fellows are here.
Yeah.
Thank you again for the talk today. I have kind of a logistical question about this year.
You've seen this as many times as Jacob, I think, right?
almost. He's got a couple of years head start on me, I think.
Well, one of these days it's going to make sense to you guys, or I'm going to have to change it, I guess. I'm not sure.
We'll get it right. We'll get it right at some point. I have just a question about how the mentorship stuff is going to work this year. Are we still sort of being paired up? And the idea is like virtual meet and greets, or I'm just sort of curious if anything has been rolling on that so far.
Yeah, so we've secured a list of different mentors, and once we know who the 6 teams are that are moving forward in the mentorship program, we'll try and align those to the best person depending on their area of expertise and or their experience. So you will be paired up for about 4 to 5 weeks. And then the week before the actual pitch event, you'll actually get a chance to test your pitch out with a different mentor from the group. And so you'll get advice from someone that's completely different, that hasn't been sitting with you and building the slides, so fresh eyes. And so then based on that interaction, you can either change or update your slides with your mentor again, if you choose, or just on your own. So you do have two opportunities there. The other piece is that you will have access to someone to ask questions specifically about confidentiality. So you have to have concerns about talking to your mentor, because they are from the business community. From a confidentiality perspective, we have Suzanne on board that will answer any confidentiality issues before you even speak with your mentor, or along the way throughout the month, if you like. So those are sort of the things that we have in the queue. And I don't know if you have more questions about that.
That's great. Thank you.
All right. I think we're there, Jen.
I did put in the chat, everyone, the dates just to remind you. So the proposals are due on March 26th by 5 o'clock. And then the teams that are moving forward in the competition will be notified by April 5th. And then you'll be assigned a mentor from there. And then the actual final pitches will happen on May 17th. So just to give you an idea of the dates, I've put the link to the website there. All the materials that you need to create your proposal is there. I will be actually probably emailing the slides to just the participants, Eric, that way, unless we decide, I mean, we can talk to you offline about that if we want to just make them available to anyone that goes to the site or not. But we will make sure that at least everyone on this call will get a copy of today's slides to help you out as well.
Yep, fantastic. And I want to point out, I'd love to see some, some of the really interesting research coming out of this competition ultimately make it into the demo day as somebody really moving forward with a venture. We will do that twice a year. So it'll typically be end of April, early May, and then kind of early December. So twice a year opportunities to get in front of quite a number of investors. It is competitive to do that, but I'd love to see something coming out of this eventually make its way there.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. Yeah, hopefully people on the call see this as a stepping stone towards bigger, brighter things related to their innovations. And we just really want to help people get started. And even if this competition doesn't feel quite right yet for you, it doesn't mean that we can't support you and assign you a mentor that would help you through the year to get ready for next year's competition, for example. So just see this as an opportunity to dive into a different space than you're used to in terms of the research world. And we're here to support you.
Perfect. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, David. Jacob, Mike, good to see you guys.
Thank you.
Good, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Have a great weekend. Thanks, Alexander.
Yeah.